books and magazines. These books and magazines were full of diverse and strange stories. No one knows whether these stories are real or just the imagination of an author. Here we will list for you a group of terrifying stories that it has been transmitted by several foreign books for many years, and you, the readers, have the right to conclude about the reliability of these stories or whether they are just myths, inspired by the imagination of an unknown author. 1. The Severed Hand of Akhenaten's Daughter. Count Lewis Hammond was known for his fame in the field of medicine and psychological treatment. He used to receive many gifts, including very precious ones, from his patients. But the strangest gift he received was from an Egyptian sheikh, who came to him seeking treatment while he was in Luxor for malaria. That was in the year 1890, during which, after exerting great effort, the Count was able to completely cure the sheikh of his illness, and he insisted that the Count accept his priceless gift. The gift was nothing but the dried right hand of the mummy of a pharaonic princess, who was killed after she was tortured and raped by the priests. The story of the princess revolves around as follows. In the 17th and last year of the rule of Pharaoh Akhenaten, he disagreed strongly with his daughter for religious and political reasons, so he asked his priests to torture and kill his daughter. This was around the year 1357 BC. Then they cut off her right hand and buried her secretly in the Valley of the Kings. Their goal in cutting off the hand was to prevent the daughter from entering paradise. According to pharaonic beliefs, if the body of the dead person lacks any part, he is deprived of entering the afterlife of bliss. The Count's wife was upset by this terrifying gift and asked her husband to get rid of it as soon as possible. The Count tried to give the hand to one of the museums in London, but all the museums rejected the offer, which made the Count put it in an empty closet in his house. And after several years, in the year 1922, the Count and his wife decided to reopen the treasury again, but they were overcome with fear and panic because the dry hand, which was more than 3,200 years old, began to take on soft flesh again. What made the wife insist on getting rid of the hand in any way? And during a letter that Lewis wrote to his friend, the archaeologist Lord Carnarvon, in which he described how he gently placed the hand in the stove and read aloud a text from the Pharaonic Book of the Dead, during which the house shook violently and he sank into pitch darkness, and both Lewis and his wife fell to the ground from the intensity of fear that froze them in their place. They saw the ghost of a woman wearing a royal pharaonic dress, and her right hand was cut off, so that the woman headed towards the stove, leaned towards the fire, and disappeared as she appeared. Count Lewis and his wife were taken for treatment to the hospital after that. Note: the reliability of this story cannot be confirmed, but it can be said with certainty that Britain carried out the largest plundering of the pharaonic civilization in history, and the evidence is that British museums are full of pharaonic artifacts. 2. They were hungry, so they ate their companion. During the sinking of a British ship called Peru at the Atlantic Ocean in January 1884, only 4 sailors were able to survive, and they were crammed into a small lifeboat that was tossed about by the waves for several heavy days, so that they almost died from extreme hunger and fatigue. So the group's captain, Edwin Root, put forward a strange proposal, which was to vote, and the vote was to kill one of the 4 and eat his flesh, so that they would not all die. 2 of them, Josh Dooley and Will Horn, agreed, but the third, 18-year-old Dick Tomlin, absolutely refused, explaining his decision that he would rather die of starvation than participate in eating one of his dear comrades, and perhaps his decision determined his fate, as his 3 comrades waited until he fell asleep. So they slaughtered him and ate his flesh to escape. And after several days, the 3 sailors got help from another fishing boat called Gilbert. Captain Gilbert was shocked by the horrific scene he saw on the boat of the remains and blood of the slaughtered victim. He decided to collect the remaining remains and bones, put them in a cloth and hand them over to the relevant authorities. The 3 sailors were sentenced to death. However, the Minister of the Interior saw the sentence as harsh, explaining that the three had suffered enough horrors while they were on the high seas, so the sentence was reduced to 6 months. But the strange thing about the story is what will happen to the sailors after they are released from prison. After prison, Josh Dooley found work on a horse-drawn carriage. Several days later, during a foggy day in the British capital, London, the horses saw a ghost that terrified them, so they revolted en masse and threw Josh off the carriage, where he fell and shattered his head in a tragic way. When Captain Edwin Root, who came up with the terrible idea, heard the news of his friend's death, he thought at first glance that the Dick family was taking revenge on those who ate their son. So he went looking for their friend Will to warn him, but Will was ill and immersed in the world of drinking, so he did not heed the captain's warnings. One night, Will drank a lot of alcohol until he fainted, so he was quickly taken to the hospital. There in the hospital, he was placed in a large ward containing a number of patients. In the middle of the night, the patients and the hospital staff woke up to Will screaming and wailing. When they approached him, they found that he had died, with signs of panic and fear evident on his features. Some patients narrated that they saw a ghostly ghost holding Will before he passed away. When the news of Will's death reached the captain, he became terrified and panicked. So he decided to go to the nearest police station, where he told them about his fear of Dick's revenge, and asked them to put him in one of the station cells prepared for prisoners. The security men agreed to his request, and he was placed in a cell alone. And it was confirmed that the door was closed on him well, and in the dark night, the policemen heard a terrifying scream coming from the captain's cell, so they headed towards him and quickly opened the door, where they found him lying dead on the floor, and he was staring at the ceiling with eyes filled with fear and dread. And what sparked? The police were confused by the presence of blood-stained cotton and cloth dating back to the cloth, in which the remains and body parts of Dick Tomlin were collected by Captain Edwin Root. Note: this story is also considered one of the strange stories, and has been circulated in several books dealing with the world of horror. And here the same question arises: can the murdered person actually return and take revenge on those who killed him? And why do millions of the dead who were killed by some dictatorial rulers not return for revenge? Who are they? 3. The stricken ship. Captain Warren was leading his American whaling ship, the Harold, off the western coast of Greenland within the Arctic Circle. While he was standing on its bridge, he saw from afar another three-masted ship wandering among the floating pieces of ice. It seemed like a distant shadow as he watched it with 8 sailors below his leadership. Then they decided to take a small boat and approach it, perhaps discovering its secret. And when they approached, the captain was able to read its name on its side, which was covered by ice. The name of the ship was Octavius, so he, accompanied by 4 sailors, decided to board it. And there was the surprise. After they opened the door to the sailors' hold, they found the bodies of 28 men, all of them lying in their beds with heavy covers over them. So they went to the captain's cabin and found the captain also dead, and he was in a prostrate position on a table above the ship's log, with a pen next to his hand, and he looked like a man. He fell asleep while writing, and in a bed next to him they found the frozen body of a blonde woman under piles of blankets, and in one of the corners there was a sailor and a child who buried his head in his lap as if searching for warmth. They were in a sad and frozen position. The captain and his sailors decided to carry the ship's log and leave as evidence of the tragedy they had witnessed. After returning to their ship, they stood and watched the stricken ship move away until it disappeared permanently among the icebergs. The last date recorded in the log of the ill-fated ship was September 11, 1762, and the ship's captain wrote that the Octavian had been stuck in freezing waters for 17 days, and the fire had gone out in it, and they were unable to ignite it. Its location at that time was longitude 160 west, with a latitude of 75 north. Captain Warren looked at the map, and he was in a state of astonishment at what he discovered. In the last hours of its cruise life, the ship Octavius was in the Arctic Ocean, north of Bonnet Barrow, Alaska, thousands of miles away from the place where they found it, and apparently according to the captain's belief. Unknown forces led the ship for 13 years towards the east, across the vast mountains of snow, until it entered the North Atlantic Ocean. Thanks to this ill-fated ship, the sailors later discovered what they had dreamed of for centuries, which was the discovery of the Northwestern Strait that connects the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans across the Arctic Ocean. 4. A story about teleportation. A sailor suddenly entered the captain's room and saw a strange man leaning over the ship's log, holding a pen. When he caught him, he suddenly disappeared. Then the sailor went and told the captain what he saw. The captain decided to review the records and found a strange sentence that said, "Head to the northeast." The ship had been sailing in the North Atlantic, near the Canadian coast, during the past century. So the captain decided to change the direction of his ship and head towards the place he was asked to head to. And there he encountered the sinking ship. When the sailors were helping the survivors board the ship, the sailor recognized one of them and told the captain that he was the one he had seen in his room, recording the sentence before he disappeared. And when the captain asked that person to write the same sentence, the two lines happened to be identical. Note: several sources talked about stories of people who were subjected to teleportation in several eras, but this phenomenon cannot be confirmed or denied, as long as science continues to research and uncover the mysteries of this phenomenon, if it is actually real. 5. The strange covenant between two friends. Lord Broome made a strange treaty with a friend of his after a discussion took place between them about the reliability of life after death. The treaty stipulates, the one who dies first will appear to the last to confirm the existence of life after death. Many years passed and time separated the two friends, and the friend went to settle in India. One day, the Lord came out of his bathroom and was surprised to find the ghost of his friend sitting on a nearby chair. Then he quickly disappeared. He recorded the date of the incident in his notebook. A few days later, a letter arrived from India, confirming to him that his friend had died on September 19th. Note: science is still investigating the extent of the existence of life after death. However, scientific results so far indicate that there is no life after death. However, there are people who saw in their dreams some members of their family visiting them, and they were told that they were living happily, or misery. And there are those who saw the ghost of some members of his family wandering around the house and suddenly disappearing. 6. The serial killer's skull. British doctor John Killens was fond of collecting human skulls and keeping them in ebony boxes inside his home while he was at West Suffolk Hospital, where he worked in the 1870s. He was impressed by a skeletal skull kept in the hospital that belonged to a famous serial killer. In that time was called William Corder. He was 23 years old when he was hanged, so he decided to seize it by any means possible. One day, he broke into the hospital in the cover of darkness and stole the skull while the guards were unaware. He added it to his large collection. He felt great joy, but his joy did not last long. The doctor's life turned into hell after the spirit of the serial killer inhabited the doctor's house. He could hear the sound of his heavy breathing and sometimes the sound of his sobbing. One day a flying white hand appeared and began to destroy everything it encountered in its path in the house, so he felt the doctor was terrified. He decided to smash the skull, but his friend wanted to have it, so he gave it to him. However, troubles and misfortunes befell him in turn, so the duo decided to bury it through official religious ceremonies. Thus, Corder's soul was finally at ease. 7. The Princess of Death and the Titanic. While he was in Cairo in 1910, Egyptian studies scholar Douglas Murray received a tempting deal from an unidentified American. He offered to buy from him a box decorated with ivory and gold, inside which was the mummy of a pharaonic princess who held a high position in the temple of Amun-Ra, and who likely lived around 1600 AD year BC in Thebes. Murray salivated at this offer. He accepted the offer with joy and began the procedures for transporting the box and the mummy to his home in London, when he told one of the archaeologists close to him about the box and the mummy. He assured him that the mummy belonged to a princess. She held an important position in the priesthood of death in the Temple of Amun-Ra. Scientist Murray's happiness with his deal did not last long. During a hunting trip in the Upper Nile, the gun exploded in his hand for no reason. He was hospitalized and his injured arm had to be amputated. During his return to England, 4 of his companions died, including 2 Egyptian servants without a trace, a specific reason which brought terror and panic to Murray's soul. So he decided to get rid of the mummy and the box, but a close friend convinced him to give it up to her, so he agreed without hesitation. But disasters soon surrounded Murray's friend. Her mother died, her boyfriend abandoned her, and she became seriously ill. Before her death, she requested in her will that the box with the mummy be returned to Murray, who expressed his annoyance and lack of desire for it. So he decided to give it to the British Museum, and while a photographer was taking pictures of the mummy, he suddenly fell to the ground dead. A few days later, a senior official at the museum specializing in Egyptian antiquities died. The press wrote about the news of the mummy's curse, which disturbed the members of the museum board, who in turn decided to get rid of this burden and gifted it to the New York Museum, which agreed on the condition that the matter be kept secret.
Was the sinking of the Titanic caused by the mummy's curse? The story says that the box with the mummy inside was placed on the Titanic, which was making its first voyage from Southampton to New York. The ship was designed with a huge, modern structure and an absolutely unsinkable capacity. However, the ship sank under mysterious circumstances. It is said that it collided with an iceberg, causing the box to sink, with the cursed mummy and more than 1,400 passengers inside it. Note, the issue of the sinking of the Titanic remains one of the sensitive issues that some countries have tried to conceal, and change the course of the story so as not to address the subject in a realistic or scientific way. In my personal opinion, it is likely that the sinking of the Titanic was an intelligence act carried out by a country by placing explosives inside the ship and detonating it later with all the passengers on board for the purpose of getting rid of some of the personalities who were on board the ship. And the ship's captain had many facts about whoever carried out the operation, then got rid of him by killing him and claiming that he committed suicide or that he was complicit with those who carried out the plan and then killed himself out of remorse or after threats that forced him to commit suicide. Therefore, a scientific investigation must be reopened to uncover the circumstances of the entire accident, because the movie Titanic, which was financed with huge amounts of money, played an important role in obliterating the truth of this accident or establishing a certain idea in the recipient about the entire accident. 8. Searching for the grave of the last witch burned in Britain. The researcher in supernatural sciences, Terry Balmag, was searching for the grave of the last witch who was burned in Britain. He believed that her name was Elsa, as she was tortured and crucified to be burned in the village of Dedham in Iskin in the year 1763. Terry decided, 200 years after her death, he decided to go into search, perhaps finding the place where she was buried. However, strange events accompanied him throughout his search. When Terry visited an old monastery, he met a strange man who was with his dog. He started barking when he approached Terry hysterically. Then he went behind him and started barking on something, but Terry only saw emptiness, as if the dog saw something that Terry could not see. The same thing happened with another dog in one of the warehouses. Terry had previously held a seat to obtain information about Elsa. He believed that she had come and decided to stay with him. What caused him fear and panic about the extent of her power and control over his life. After a while, Terry's father suffered a health setback and lost a lot of money after a fire broke out in his factory, as if a curse had befallen the family. However, Terry confirmed that he found Elsa's grave near an old hotel in the area of the village where she was killed, and that when he stood in the intended place, he felt a numbness sweeping through his entire body, so he decided to seek the help of a friend of his to uncover the burial place, but they did not reach any conclusion. No one believed Terry's words at the hotel except the bartender, who confirmed that he was eating his lunch one day, and watching the bar through a mirror in the room. He saw a strange woman wandering around the place, so he got up to serve her, but he was surprised when he arrived to find the bar empty and the doors closed. Note, we do not know the credibility of this story. Or perhaps Terry tried to create such a scenario to gain sales for his books about paranormal phenomena.